Right.
Good enough. Yeah.
Okay, we're just going to keep letting some people in. So yeah, welcome to How to Talk About a Well-Being Economy. My name is Kate Petru. I am the comms co-lead, also focusing on narratives. I have some of my colleagues here today. My other comms lead, Francis, who's going to be handling some working through the presentation. And Amira is going to be joining us later as well to give you some updates on the digital community. So I will just go ahead and start with what we're going to be talking about today. So going on to the agenda. So first of all, many of you might be members of WEAll, maybe you're part of a hub, or you've heard about us before. Oh, sorry. Or maybe this is all completely new to some of you. So we are going to do just a quick sort of what is the Wellbeing Economy Alliance and Wellbeing Economy theory. I'm then going to go over some narrative considerations, the 5 needs. Maybe some of you have seen this framework before, and the 4 Ps. And with those, we're going to be going through some case studies so you can help explain it in situ. And then going over some communication strategies and resources. So. And if you have questions, feel free to pop them into the chat as I present. And then we're going to have around 10 minutes at the end to address some of those questions. We might not get to all of them, but we're going to do our best to try to summarize those and get to them. So let's just start off with the Wellbeing Economy Alliance and who we are. So the Wellbeing Economy Alliance came out in 2017. Go to the next slide, as a collaboration of academics and NGOs and activists who recognized that the dominant economic model being followed around the world wasn't delivering for the majority of people, and it was leading to runaway climate change and driving inequality. Some of the founders also helped to kickstart something called the Wellbeing Economy Government Partnership Program, which we talk about next. So there are 6 countries that are involved, 1 actively participating, but it is a group of governments committed to shifting the focus of their economies from traditional measures of GDP to broader measures of well-being. This approach prioritizes human and environmental health, social equity, and sustainable development. So yeah, maybe some of you have heard of WEGO before, but really the goal is to prioritize well-being of people and planet and create policies that emphasize that over short-term economic growth. So just generally about WEAll and who we are, we have 15 hubs around the world. We have almost 3,000 individual members, 400 organizational members, 6 national governments, which we just mentioned. We also have a policymakers network, a number of academics and ambassadors and spokespeople. The next image here, you'll see there's a lot of the 15 hubs that are across the world. Again, maybe some of you are calling in from them. If not, and you want to start a hub, we have resources on that too. So next I want to talk about, how we try to create this change. There's really a 3-prong approach. The first is through narratives. So we try to come up with new narratives to challenge the current dominant economic narrative. And then the second is through policies. So really trying to change the rules and practices at an institutional level. And last is through power and power bases and community. So we understand the power of community and amplifying voices of those who are really already talking about economic system change, and we want to have those voices be heard. So our next question is, what is the economy? Well, if we think about it, the economy is really just a way that we produce and provide for one another. There's people and planet are really not here to serve the economy. If we look at the next image, they are here to serve us. The economy is here to serve us. So if the next one, if we shouldn't need to justify why investing in healthcare benefits the economy. Instead, we should be evaluating the economy on its contributions to our health and our well-being. But the problem is, we've elevated the economy for so long that it's really hard for us to move beyond this economic logic. And there's some research that has shown that and this was done by Black and Sands. Oh, sorry, 1 second here. Found that around 1/3 of the economy of British people feel comfortable engaging with economics, and only 17% think they have a good understanding of the economy. And actually, most could not accurately define what GDP is. And so in this research, people thought about the economy as this mysterious black box, and you probably heard of the invisible hand and things like that. And this is really challenging when trying to change the economic narrative, because people feel like they don't have control over it. They feel like it's something that's outside of them and they don't really understand. So next, we just want to talk about, what are narratives? Well, narratives and systems change are the stories and frameworks used to communicate and promote transformative changes in our societal systems and norms. They work to provide context and meaning and a cohesive message over time. And so this is more thinking about long-term messages and influences and beliefs that influence beliefs and attitudes and perceptions. So sometimes a lot of people get narratives confused with maybe a communication campaign, for example. So a communication campaign. Oh, sorry, people don't mind putting themselves on mute. That would be great. It might change people's. Sorry, it's more of a short-term project versus narratives is like long-term. It's a long-term goal. It's really changing about global perceptions. So what is the dominant narrative? The dominant narrative, you've seen it before. It's everywhere. It's GDP measures success. It's trickle-down economics. It's that invisible hand. The American dream, wealth is progress and power. And there was this study that they found. You'll see in this next graph that the media are really still obsessed with GDP. I love this study. Happy Planet Index presented it to me, and they did this research from I think it was about a year up to 2024, and they found, and again, this is just in English language papers, but the indicators that people are talking about in the media are predominantly GDP. So you have unemployment rate after that, you have carbon emissions, life expectancy, life satisfaction, human development index, and the Gini index. So it's really interesting that this is still super pervasive. In the next slide, you'll see that they did a study. This is from a narrative report from the Center for Social and Economic Rights in South Africa. And they brought this forward. I thought this was really interesting. So you'll see there was research that tried to gauge people's attitudes towards universal basic income in Europe and South Africa. And you'll see at the top, people are pretty much in agreement with it. You have, public opinion ranging from 32% to 68%. But then it's interesting. Then when they did the study, and this is with South Africans, they asked, what do you think is the single most important thing that a government should be doing? And the majority of them said job creation and providing, after that, it was providing an income grant, but much, much lower, around 15%. So, and what they said is that there's a lot of conflicting responses around this because of the dominant conservative narrative. And so you'll see in the next slide, I mentioned some of the places that we have been featured. WEAll has been trying to penetrate the media landscape and social media and so forth. And we've had some really great wins, and we've been in some really esteemed outlets like The Economist Impact, BBC, CNBC, but it's still taking time for people to sort of pick up this message. So, what is the well-being economy narrative? It's just a quick summary, and I'll give you a longer summary of it. But success is measured by the quality of life, not just GDP. Everyone has access to resources and opportunities that they need to succeed. Our economy should allow our environment to flourish. Citizens are actively engaged in their communities and economic decisions. So how do we get people to really change their minds on this? So what I'm going to be talking about now are just some quick tips on how to frame things and how to use narratives. And then I'm going to go into the 5 needs and put that into practice. So how to frame. First, what you want to do is activate a shared value and explain the problem and the solution, and then end with a call to action. And what we want to do is we want to emphasize that we do have control over this. Going back to that mysterious black box, people are confused and really intimidated about the economy. And because of that, they don't think that they have the power to change it. But really, it's a system that's shaped by policies, choices, and actions of individuals and communities. So we want to create narratives that emphasize our collective power over the economy so we can inspire people to engage in it. And that can result in economic policies that impact their lives. So if we think about GDP, for example, that was an invention. Here's the person who created GDP in the first place. You've probably seen this before, but Simon Kuznets, he's developed it in the 1930s, and it was for the US. And he actually, when he created, he cautioned to use it just a measure of economic health. He warned Congress actually not to be so narrowly focused on it. And he said, the welfare of a nation can scarcely be inferred by a measurement of national income as defined by the GDP, himself. So people created the system that we're in, and we can create a new system. So another point to keep in mind is establishing common ground. You really want to start your argument with an inclusive statement and values that are disarming because they probably believe in the same values. So here are some examples of phrases that you can use. Most of us, or we all believe, or no one wants. It's only right that. So putting this into the practice, it's no matter what we look like or where we come from, we want our families to have freedom to drink clean water, breathe safe air, and live in healthy communities. You see how that argument's a little disarming for someone who might be prepared to want to argue with you. The second is we all want to live in a world where everyone has enough to live in safety and comfort on a healthy planet. Another trick in terms of narratives and presenting your argument is using metaphors. And this metaphor, I'm going to bring in some other metaphors later on, but this metaphor in particular, I came up in the research a lot, in our research and with other groups. So in the Framework Institute and Black Sands Communication found that using metaphors like reprogram or update the system or redesign really resonated with participants, and it didn't feel intimidating for them. For some reason, a lot of them felt uncomfortable with the word transform. When we did our own narrative research and I talked to a few of our maybe more conservative members, they said, there are benefits to our current economic system. And so, we don't want to totally throw that out the window. And so using things like reprogram or update makes it feel like we're just making some tweaks. So we can redesign the economy to prioritize health and well-being of people on the planet. We can reprogram our economy so that it works in the interest of everyone. And the next thing to really keep in mind is you really want to connect the dots. So some of the problems and examples I'll be bringing up, we see it in the narrative of the media. So they might talk about, the climate crisis or inequality, or life expectancy. But what they're not doing is they're not connecting those problems with the economy. So when you are presenting your examples, you might want to start making those connections. So instead of just bringing up inequality alone, connecting inequality to well-being. Or if you're bringing up the environment, don't just bring up the environment, connect it to inequality or connect it to GDP. And people can start to begin to make those connections. One last thing here before I get into the values is we did a bunch of testing with our own members, and for this message actually tended to do really well when just summing it all up in one sentence. So I figured it important to bring it up. But a well-being economy delivers social justice on a healthy planet. Again, feel free to put some of the questions you have in the chat and we can get to those later on. Next, I'm going to be getting into WEAll's 5 needs. Now, probably many of you have seen this before. I'm just going to quickly go over them, but it's dignity, fairness, participation, nature, and purpose. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these values and apply them to the framework that we just talked about. So remember how we said when you're engaging in a conversation with someone, bring up values.
Sorry, Kate. Hey,
You're
sorry.
muted.
Kate, sorry.
Unmute. Can you hear me now?
Yeah,
All
I'm so
good.
sorry. I just tried to like blanket mute everybody because every time someone new was coming in, I was having to manually do it. And then I tried to
Oh,
unmute you and sorry.
no, no
Sorry.
worries. Sorry.
Yeah, I would just recap on this slide. Sorry about
Yeah,
that.
yeah, no worries. So, yeah, I'm really sorry about that, guys. Sorry. Many of you have probably seen this before. These are the WEAll 5 needs. So they're dignity, fairness, participation, nature, and purpose. And what I'm going to be doing next is taking some of the framework that we talked about. So on the next slide, activate a shared value. We're going to use one of the 5 needs. Then we're going to explain the problem and the solution, and then we're going to end with a call to action. So I'll get into that now. Um, so this is a value I think most people could agree with. Everyone, should have enough to live in comfort, safety, and happiness. So this is the value. So now it's time to get into the problem connected to this. So wherever you're based in, you can pull statistics from wherever you are, because it looks like cost of living seems to be going up everywhere. And this is a pertinent one that we do see in the media. But I've just brought up the UK as an example here. And you can see in this graph, the left is on the price of rent and how it's drastically increased. And then also the rising cost of living is really hitting all groups, up to almost 27%. I think it's like 1 in 4 children are living in poverty. And then what you want to try to do next is really, again, connecting the dots in your problems. I think this information is really interesting. The World Health Organization said that 35% of what makes a difference to life expectancy is really about income, security, and poverty. Can you put food on the table? And 29% is about your living conditions. So it's not can say you're not isolating the issue of cost of living. The cost of living is really having an impact on our own life expectancy, which is wild. And so then we go into a solution and someone who's really worked to try to address this. And a good example of that is Iceland. And they've created a lot of initiatives and policies that work to reduce the cost of living and created affordable housing programs. And one of the reasons for this is because they have a framework that goes beyond GDP. They're called indicators for measuring well-being, and they have 39 indicators, and GDP is only one of them. So they're really using policies that look at all of these different things, not just GDP growth alone. So in summary, and hopefully this isn't pedantic, but I'm really just trying to, get this into everyone's minds. The great way to set it up is, what's the value? Everyone should have enough to live in safety and comfort. But right now, the cost of living has greatly increased, up to 27%. Life expectancy is falling for people in low-income homes because our economy prioritizes economic growth above all else. Solution example, we can redesign our economy to focus on what really matters. For example, Iceland uses a framework of indicators, including tackling the cost of living crisis, to measure economic success. When you put a goal like this at the heart of the economy, you end up with policies like increasing the supply of affordable housing and ensuring businesses conform to fair work practices. And then you want to end with a call to action. So maybe write your elected representative today. The next value I'm going to bring up is around nature. Again, I think we can all agree on this. Humans are one with nature, and we should give back as much as we take from Earth. So what is the problem? There's so many problems around this one, but I brought in these graphs. CO2 emissions are at an all-time high in human history. And again, we're connecting the dots here, but emissions are tied to economic growth, and you can see this direct connection. Another thing to keep in mind, global wildlife population has plummeted by an average of 69% since 1970. But the problem is GDP doesn't account for this. Cleaning up an oil spill might be good, or even a hurricane, and this is because of the cost of cleanup. So when we make policy decisions that are based on GDP, we end up setting up the wrong priorities. And what's wild is that John F. Kennedy actually said this himself. Gross national product counts air pollution, cigarette advertising, ambulances to clear our highways of carnage. It measures neither wit nor courage, nor our wisdom nor our learning, neither our compassion nor our devotion to our country. It measures everything in short except for what makes life worthwhile. I think that's a key thing too, is really bringing in influential spokespeople or people that have spoken about this before. And here's another metaphor that you're welcome to use. I love this because Kate Rayworth uses this a lot, but she says, the problem with GDP, it's sort of like going to the doctors when you get a checkup. When you go to get a checkup, do you just get your heart rate measured? That's like GDP. It's one indicator. No, they're going to look at everything. They're going to look at your blood work. They're going to do a physical examination. And so that's really one of the problems with GDP. So now going into what the solution is. The Wellbeing of Future Generations Act in 2015 was a groundbreaking piece of legislation, and it aimed to improve social, economic, environmental, cultural well-being of whales. So what's really interesting about it too is the act actually requires public bodies in Wales to think about the long-term impacts of their decision. So that means policies that are made have to really be in line with what the goals are of the legislation. And so as to help the, people and communities to address persistent problems such as poverty, health, inequality, and climate change. And in practice, actually, Wales ended up stopping a highway proposal due to the Future Generations Act. Because the project was actually found to be misaligned with the interest of future generations because it favored only short-term profits. And didn't have the interest of future generations in mind. So putting it all together, again, the value, we all want to be able to enjoy a safe and thriving natural world. But our natural world is cracking at the seams. Global wildlife population has plummeted. And I put in one of the stats here and put in the one that's most relevant for you. Since 1970, we're running out of time to stop climate change. The economic model we inherited didn't factor in the natural limits of the earth. So the example, we can redesign our economy to prioritize well-being of people and planet over profit. The Future Generations Act offers a promising example that is being copied elsewhere. All policies, when they go through, have to be assessed for their impact on the current and future generations, which includes environmental impacts. And you can say something like, follow us here if you're really interested in learning more. So the next value is purpose. We all have a shared sense of belonging, and our institutions should serve the common good. What is the problem? Well, inequality is really wildly out of control now. These graphs here, and I brought in some indicators from the global north and the global south here, but you can see this is the pathway of the richest 10% of income share. And it's really increased across the board from Australia and Germany to China and Brazil and Mexico. And it just seems to be getting worse across the board. The next part is, again, connecting those dots. Okay, well, how does inequality impact our well-being? And maybe many of you have heard of the spirit level before, of Kate Pickett and Richard Wilkinson, but they did some amazing, amazing work where they basically mapped out countries with high income inequality and low income inequality, and they found that countries that have low income inequality, like Norway, Denmark, and Finland and Sweden, actually had lower rates of violence, of addiction. They had better health outcomes. Whereas if you went on the opposite end of the spectrum, the United States, Israel, or Greece, they actually have higher problems when it comes to health outcomes, mental health, etc., and addiction, violence, and all of that. So the problem is we can't just be using GDP to measure this because it's not showing us these problems. And again, another metaphor. Feel free to come up with some of your own, but we find these ones really work. We like to talk about here diminishing marginal returns. Apologies for those of you who might not be familiar with this economic concept, but essentially it means it's the idea that you get less bang for your buck the more you have of something. So we like to think of it like salt. Salt is fantastic. You can have a bit of it in your diet and it brings out the flavor. But if you have way too much of it, like growth, it actually can really impact your health. And the same way that, too much growth it starts to hit a peak of diminishing marginal returns. And so we have a graph here that you're really welcome to use that I think explains this. And you can see as GDP increases, so does life expectancy, but it hits this point of diminishing marginal returns. It levels off. So you can see that Lebanon, for example, or Portugal, they has a longer life expectancy than the United States with less than half of their GDP. So I think, yeah, this is a really interesting example. A country that we think it's really doing a great job at trying to avoid this and prioritizing other things like the environment and well-being over economic growth is Costa Rica. So they have, I think, 0.03% of the GDP of the US, but they have a longer life expectancy and they're nearing 100% renewable energy. So they have, again, lower GDP, a minimal impact on the environment. And they just have lots of great initiatives there. So putting that all together in the summary, we all want to feel a sense of belonging. But our growth-centric economic model is leading to eye-watering levels of inequality. Research has shown that economic inequality leads to poor mental health and physical health in society. The solution, again, we want to show people that it's possible to change things, and Costa Rica has done that for us. We can reprogram our economy so it prioritizes health and well-being of people and planet over endless economic growth. Costa Rica exemplifies this approach in achieving high levels of well-being with relatively low economic growth and prioritizing environmental sustainability and well-being. And call to action, find out more, sign up. So we just have two more values left here. So the next one is fairness. This is justice in all its dimensions at the heart of our economic system. I feel like that's something we can all agree on. But here's the problem. Again, there's many stats, unfortunately, to choose from. I've focused on the US in this one. This graph here just shows you the difference in wealth between the wealth gap between whites versus Black and Latinos. And then I just wanted to highlight some of the health equity issues during COVID, where Black people make up 17.7% of the American population, but they accounted for 23% of deaths. In the next slide, there's a really interesting book that talks about these health equities. Dr. Mara and Patel argue that our health is profoundly influenced by social and economic conditions. They emphasize that these injustices in society create stress and inflammation in the body, and then that leads to various health issues. Another key point, I think, when you're bringing up fairness is really making those connections between colonialism and capitalism and racism. One of our ambassadors, Polo, who's fantastic. She wrote this great article that I just quoted her here. But to understand the flaws of GDP, we first must recognize its ahistorical nature and its failure to acknowledge the deep colonial context in which these countries global north derived their wealth. So I think making these connections is really important. And also in that book that I mentioned, they do trace back the historical roots of health disparities in the gap and linking them to colonialism and capitalism. The positive end, we see that in New Zealand, they've actually been working with local Indigenous people there to create frameworks that go beyond GDP. So that they have the Treasury's Living Standards framework, and this actually brought in some of the values of these Indigenous stakeholders, and it recognized the interconnectedness of people, the environment, and spiritual well-being. And so the framework really incorporates things that are meaningful to them and works to improve their well-being, income, health, housing, etc. So in summary, justice and fairness should be at the heart of our economic system. A significant wealth gap exists for people of color, and research has shown that racism and poverty contribute to a number of health issues. But in New Zealand, they developed economic framework in consultation with local Indigenous people to create values and goals that support their local communities. So call to action, we need to adopt similar inclusive approaches, engaging with marginalized communities to redesign our economic system to ensure justice, fairness, and the well-being of citizens. And our last value is participation. So I think we all believe that citizens really should be actively engaged in their community and making economic decisions. But the problem is, and we've seen a lot of these headlines recently, but voters feel like their voices aren't heard. Voter confidence is low. Another one of these, European support for authoritarianism grows as citizens feel unheard, report warns. So this is a big issue. And part of the problem, and a study that I wanted to bring up next is they actually did a poll where they looked at 2,000 polls and summaries to understand how the average citizen's preference, if the average citizen's preference actually impacts the policy of whether it was likely to go through or not. And they compared that with the preferences of special interest groups and economic elites. So you can see here, average citizens' preferences, just going back to the previous slide, average citizens' preferences for a policy to go through, the probability was around, I think it's 0.03. But if you look at the preference of economic elites and alignments of special interest groups, it's around 0.7 and 0.56. So in other words, if fewer than 20% of wealthy Americans supported a policy change, it only happened 18% of the time. But when 80% of them were in support, the change ended up happening 45% of the time. So I think this study just really emphasizes what we're seeing in those headlines is true. The average citizen's preferences for policies actually aren't being heard, which is extremely frustrating. But there is a solution to this. And so we have, there's citizens' assemblies. So the French Citizen Assembly, there was a convention for climate, and they randomly selected 150 citizens participated, and they ended up presenting 149 proposals, and many of them were actually integrated into France's climate and resilience law. And then in Belgium and Eastern Belgium, this is one of our favorite examples because it's a permanent citizens' assembly. So citizens are invited at random to take part in a panel for 3 months, and then the panel deliberates on a topics and makes recommendations for Parliament to debate. So this isn't just a sort of a one-off, everyone getting together. It's really part of an ongoing process, which is amazing. And so in summary, everyone should be able to have their say on decisions that affect their lives. But too often policies are made with little input from citizens, leading to disenfranchisement and less effective policies. But positive, all over the world, citizen assemblies are used to increase public participation in policy decision-making. In Eastern Belgium and West Belgium, even has a permanent citizens assembly. The panel deliberates on topics that make recommendations to Parliament, which they must debate. So ensuring citizens' voices are heard is achievable through those citizens' assemblies. This approach can help reshape our economic policies to benefit both people and the planet. So those are all of our 5 needs. I hope that was helpful, and I hope the summary, again, isn't too pedantic for you, but I hope that helps to sort of hone in how you can use that framework on your own. So another sort of concept that we like to use is the 4 Ps. These sort of summarize different policies and practices of how we can get to a well-being economy. And we did talk about some of these in the above, but again, this is just a framework for you to use if you're trying to remember, how to make this argument. So if we go to the next slide, what is pre-distribution? We talked about a little bit of this, providing living wages or social enterprises and businesses owned by their workers or community wealth building. The next value here is purpose. We want to shift the purpose of the economy to deliver human and ecological well-being. So what does this mean? Well, we looked at a lot of the examples here of countries that are really going beyond GDP, and that's happening not just within the Wellbeing Economy Government Partnership Program, but in many different countries as well. So the next one is prevention. So we adopt preventative measures that stop harm from happening in the first place. So that could be outcome budgeting or circular production and consumption. And then people powered. So an example of this is citizen assemblies and participatory budgeting. Okay, so what are maybe some of the common attacks? I have a list of them that I can send you, but just for the purpose of today, I just quickly wanted to talk about, a lot of people will say, what would it cost to deliver a well-being economy? And we have a really fantastic report called Failure Demand. And so what it outlines is, having this economic system is costing people and governments tons of money in the first place. So poverty alone in the UK costs the UK 78 billion annually. Other costs that would be eliminated if we had a well-being economy would be the costs of inequality, redistribution of wealth, things like that, cleaning up disasters or health issues. from pollution. So the way that we can address this is through a lot of policy recommendations. So increase government spending on public services and social security, savings in public health and policy and military costs. Benefits maybe could come from a 4-day work week and things like that, or universal basic income. If you go to the next slide, I'm gonna send this to you. It's something that we're working on that maybe might help as well, but just an overview outline of different policy recommendations. So there's a lot here. We did go through a lot of them within some of the examples that we had, but it would be, well, some recommendations would be wellbeing economy framework. So, moving away from GDP, focusing on policies that help to regenerate nature, so eliminate waste, encourage reuse, or the next one is comprehensive and progressive tax reforms. So taxing the wealthy, addressing tax evasion and avoidance. The other one is work and care. So addressing the gender gap through public health and education, ensure fair wages for caregivers and things like that, because GDP doesn't include care work. Participatory governments for future generations. So implement long-term national planning with citizen participation, recognize the rights of future generations like we saw in Wales and things like that. So it's just a sort of a broad overview summary of some of the policy recommendations. And then next, I want to go into some communication strategies. So we just really looked at how some of our campaigns and our narratives were doing. Specifically, some of our communication tactics, and we just came up with a few strategies that might be helpful for you, looking at some of our top content. We found what really worked. Well, it's not on here, it is sort of, but with video is really engaging with people. Creating diagrams. When we took a concept and created a diagram, we had a lot of engagement. Bringing in quote cards. So this is taking someone who might have said something like Sophie Howe, for example, the previous Future Generations Commissioner, talking about GDP, putting her face on it and the quote, that really helps. And then if we see on the top right here, when some of the tweets that were the most popular were the ones that really linked back to the narrative frameworks that we talked about, which was give examples, show that it's really happening. He had said it's time Australia considers a well-being approach. Now they are, but this was the time when they weren't. He said people are doing it like New Zealand and Wales, etc. And the bottom right there is just a video from an influencer we've been working with, but we use a lot of graphs in the videos with our influencers, and we find that really helps. Yeah, and some of the stuff like with Michael Maz, actually, we've almost had 750,000 views on some of those. So yeah, I think that's been really helpful for us. So yeah, that is it in a summary. We want to open up to Q&A and see if you have any questions. Thank you so much, Francis, for doing the slides. That was really helpful. Just gonna take a look at chat here. And if there's anyone who would like to ask a question and say it themselves and put a hand up, please feel free and I can pass the mic to you. So Eddie Harris, who is the target audience for these strategies? Have you found this approach equally compelling and engaging across the board? Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it really differs. We have different, we call them like segments in our alliance. So there might be people who are maybe they're climate activists, or we have policymakers and social justice activists. I think the framing example, the way that we frame it will be the same throughout, using that tool that I mentioned, but maybe the language is going to be a little bit different, obviously, right? So if we're talking to policymakers, or we're going to be using terms that might be more relevant towards them, or if we're talking to climate activists, just sort of tweaking our language, I think really helps when we're targeting different audiences. But the way to frame is going to be the same throughout, but we're just going to be tweaking that a little bit. You mentioned some examples of wording that did not resonate. Right. Yeah. Transformation. Yeah, exactly. Considering, for example, an increasing conservative policy landscape in Europe, and other parts of the world. Do you have examples of language that resonates more with conservative policymakers? Um, yeah, no, that's a really good question. I think when you're talking to conservative policymakers, the key is really sticking to the values. So what are the common values that they have? I mean, for example, I think there was this case study where this isn't well-being economy. Well, it is well-being economy example in some ways, but I think there were some climate activist groups who were trying to get conservatives on board with more climate-friendly strategies. And what they really emphasized was job creation through green jobs, and fair wages and things like that. So maybe take a look at like what values do they prioritize first, and then weave that into the way that you're presenting your argument. Reposting.
Hey,
I love. Oh, sorry. Francis probably has a
no,
lot on
no,
this.
it's
Please,
just
please,
because
please.
I've been keeping an eye on the questions that they've been coming in. So yeah, somebody has asked a great question: are these frameworks applicable to the global south? So the problem with any kind of narrative recommendations are like narrative change needs to be really culturally specific. So it's very difficult for us working on a global scale to provide any kind of one size fits all approach, but there are kind of site specific piece of research that's been done that we can link to when we send out the recording. So there's been one done a few years ago in the UK called Framing the Economy. There's a recent one in South Africa as well, which I'll link to, which is really good. I think what's interesting is you do need to take into account the cultural norms of the place, but the more you read a few of these different pieces of research, you see the similarities. So the idea of kind of leading with values is really across the board as a way of bringing people in and reminding them of what really matters to them, and kind of not leading with the more political thing that they already maybe have a strong identity around. Things like always being very clear and explaining what your problem is and explaining your solution, and building people's sense of efficacy that we can actually do things, and bringing concrete examples. They're really kind of generic framing principles that can work across cultures. So I would really advise kind of, I think these general principles we've shared are really applicable in any context. Think about your own context and also read the research that's been done in different places to see the kind of nuances where you are. So, for example, when we talk about fairness in the context of the social security system in Scotland, we know that that can trigger lots of like unhelpful views about I pay my taxes, so what's fair? Is it to pay more for social security, for example, which you wouldn't necessarily think of. So it's a kind of subtle art, but yeah, I would be pretty confident about the general principles for sure. Another question I saw come in was something around the actions themselves feeling not very strong and the impacts of them. And yeah, sorry, I might go back, or the person who asked that might want to, I just picked that up while Kate was speaking, but I thought it'd be good to come back to that. And I wondered if this was speaking to, oh yeah, the actions feel a little underwhelming and vague. And I've it's for other action as well. Any insight around the impacts of action suggested? Is that with reference to the kind of policy recommendations that we're proposing,
Yeah,
Chelsea?
that was my question.
Great.
No, the policy recommendations seem strong. I think it's about, I'm thinking about like engaging normal people to join this cause and saying like, here's the problems, here's the solutions. Those can really fire people up. And then the action is like, sign up or follow us. And it's like, that doesn't feel like enough action. And I know this is probably going to be very specific to where you are, but also maybe ideas around how to find appropriate actions or anything in that space.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think so. Where we're positioned as the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, we're kind of more of a network to support all the various different members around the world doing their own kind of campaigning. So we wouldn't necessarily have a one size fits all call to action. So what we've put there is a little bit of a holding thing, really. But absolutely, I mean, I think it is going to be quite context specific. And yeah, you know, there's probably lots of kind of mobilization you want to do as part of a sort of wider campaign strategy if you want to have local influence. So yeah, I wouldn't say we're going to change the world by people signing up to a newsletter. That was just a kind of example of always give something for people to do. So you're not just like, we could fix the system, always be pointing people to something that they could meaningfully do, whether that's joining their local hub, or if you're a member organization, getting involved with whatever you're doing.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you.
Kate, I don't know if you've had a chance to see any questions while I've been talking.
Oh, no, yeah, just a point on that. I know it might sound or just sort of mundane and boring to say, you know, follow us or do that here. But for instance, we did a collaboration with one of our influencers, and at the end he said, you know, if you like this, follow WEAll. He literally just said it in not a very fancy way. And we ended up increasing our followers, I think, by 4,000%, or sorry, 4,000 people. So it's just to make sure that you do always have one there. And you can bring in, like, I get some of the examples, we did bring in a bit of the solution problem into your call to action, I think, if you want to make it stronger. So totally, yeah, feel free to do that. Thanks. Yeah, I used the 4 Ps. Yeah, we can definitely send you these resources as well, so that you can take a look at the 4 Ps. That's helpful. What is that? Someone asked, what's the relation between WEAll and DEAL? Actually, Marguerite's in the room and answered that. I don't know if you want to answer that.
Good answer.
You
Yeah,
did, yeah. Okay.
so it's a very collaborative one. We're working with them on several projects. So yeah, they're a great team. Thank you.
And Kate Rayworth was one of our, I think, probably founding ambassadors. So the whole point of WEAll was saying there's loads of different great pieces of work, like think tanks, research, activists going on in this sort of economic system transformation space. And we were founded really to just kind of bring everyone together and be a bit more than the sum of our parts. So we include, you know, our ambassadors include people like Jason Hickel from the degrowth movement, even though we wouldn't necessarily lead with kind of degrowth framing, because we have a very similar kind of sense of what the economy should look like, and just kind of nuances in our framings, but we obviously want to work together. I'm wondering if for the rest we'll keep a record of the chat, and maybe when we send out the recording we can kind of come back to any questions that we haven't been able to come to, because I'm really aware we have Amira, our engagement lead, on the call, and she is going to share really exciting development for the movement.
Great. So I actually won't take super long. Hi, everyone. So one of the things that we were discussing after running this session is where this conversation is going to continue. So if you are interested in continuing this discussion, connecting with others who are also interested in speaking about wellbeing economies in your respective environments, any challenges that are coming up around that, we're launching our online hub, which is a discussion space primarily, and can also hold resources. It's called together.weall.org. My intention was to show you all, if I can share my screen, which I can, just give me a moment, where this particular discussion is going to sit. I don't know if you can see my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, great.
So when you do log in, so if you use the link below, and we'll be following up as mentioned in the chat with the recording and some of the wonderful resources that Kate has alluded to in the presentation, for you to be able to kind of resource yourselves with that knowledge to be able to go out and speak in your respective environments about wellbeing economies, with some of the quite powerful examples and narratives that Kate shared today. We'll also be sharing a link to the online community. And so if you come into the discussion space, there is an area called WEAll Voices Community. And this is really the space where you can directly comment, reply, engage with other people that have been on this call, with others who are kind of joining the call to promote the wellbeing economy, and to really kind of exchange the best ways to be able to do that, the challenges that come up with doing that, resources that feel particularly useful and powerful to share, etc. And you'll see kind of on our online community spaces, you can keep up to date with our events and things like that, but also the discussion space kind of brings in different communities of people working from our network, working on particular topics around the wellbeing economy. So we do have a focus group on the connections between health and the wellbeing economy. We have conversations around investment and divestment, EU influencing. So really kind of based on all of these very different narratives, how is the wellbeing economy relevant? So that would be our call to action after this call. And I just wanted to share this exciting space with you all. So we hope to see and connect with you on there soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Amira. That's great. One other program that we're launching, well, in addition to this, will be linked up with the digital community platform, is something called WEAll Voices. I'm leaving a document here, a form where you can add your email. And what we would love to do is just have an ongoing conversation like this, because there's some really good questions that are in here, especially with the landscape right now of how we can continue to change people's perceptions and beliefs, and keep you up to date with different campaigns that we have, and also learn about maybe the projects that you're working on. So if you put in your email there, if you're a member or not, we're going to be creating that community on the digital platform as well. So please feel free to put that into the put your email into there. I think there was one other question here. Oh, Nigel, around well-being, degrowth, and well-being economy. One thing, I was saying that there's some tension there. One thing I can mention that our one of the co-founders of WEAll talks about a lot is when explaining WEAll, she says she likes to see it as a sort of a picnic blanket, and so it's a place for degrowth, it's a place for donut economics or the solidarity economy, and that's sort of part of our power bases approach, where we really want to bring in voices that are working on that, because we're stronger together. But if anyone else has thoughts on that, please. Are there any other questions? I know someone raised their hand. I'd love a live question if anyone feels comfortable, but if not, oh, we got a live question, Justin.
Hi there. Thank you so much for all of this. It's fascinating and really encouraging. But I just also wondered about the C40 Cities organization. They launched this idea about a year and a half ago that there was going to be the creation of 50 million good green jobs. And I just thought it was the biggest thing I'd ever heard from any organization ever. And so I'm just wondering if there's much cross-connecting to that, because it's such an amazing target, 50 million good green jobs. So yeah, just as an example of a cross collaboration.
Wow, love that. No, that's great. Yeah, we have been working with C40 a lot over the past the number of years. We did do a collaboration with them in the city of Vancouver, the Vancouver Economic Commission, a few years ago, on going beyond GDP. And I know our colleague who's on mat leave right now did a great paper on cities moving towards a well-being economy as well. But I love that massive goal that I'm not as close with them on that partnership. I have other colleagues that are, but I can definitely send you some of the papers that we've done with them in our collabs. Phoebe.
Hi, yeah, thank you. I just don't know how to quite quantify this question. The New Economic Network Australia is definitely a hub for WEAll in Australia, and I was unemployed, and I'm a degrowth post-growth economist who can't get salaried work in the 21st century, and I handed on the task of setting up NINA to others, and I'm just about to operate in academia. I've been underemployed in retail for years. This is not my question. I'm like, I've been engaged in the New Economy Organisers Network through the UK, whoever that new economics mob, and that's very, it was European and then it retracted back to being very UK centric. And I feel in Australia we have such a small population that we don't have intensive capacity to do a lot of, or really narratives around social solidarity organising at strength, particularly in economics distinctively. And sorry, targeting the question, you guys, a lot of the work, like you're saying, you're working, WEAll's established globally, working in Vancouver. Have you got funded capacity, and who are your funding bodies? I'm always fascinated by that. How do you get the resourcing to be working how you are? And when somebody earlier was discussing the weaknesses and feeling like a lot of the narratives, particularly when we're up against the extremities of the far right and that sort of thing, and this whole polarization in society that's happening now, to have those WEGO economies actually adopting WEAll is so powerful. And so there's a bit of this fascination about how do you do it, but it's also slowly
So interconnected.
and going with like in this whole narrative shifting, it's about blowing
Sorry.
up the
Maybe
winds.
we're just over time, so I just want to close the loop on. No, those are there's a lot in there, but I totally hear you. It's like where do you get funding? And we have, if you join one of our hubs, actually, we do have some resources on how those hubs can get funding from one of our colleagues, Michael Weatherhead, and then also the original co-founder of WEAll is now in Australia and doing a lot of great work around that as well. So I can send you some of those resources too. It seems like momentum is moving there, thankfully, because I think she is there and among many other people working in that movement. But apologies, I will have to end it here because we are out of time. But please feel free to put in your your email into the WEAll Voices. And I think we're going to take those questions and put them on the digital community platform so you can chat with others about this and continue the conversation, because it is a really, polarizing time, and we can all kind of share those tactics. So thank you all so much for joining this, whether it's the evening or the morning. Really appreciate everyone being here. And I hope to see you again. Thanks a lot. Thanks to Amira and Francis too. Thank you guys. Bye.